I'm sorry?
Does the Congress, in your opinion, enjoy voting on both sides of the issue, voting maybe?
Yes.
Did they do so in this particular case, and in your opinion, with regard to some of the amendments we passed in Central America?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me, looking at the even most restrictive amendments that were passed by Congress relative to Central America, that they referred, and we have a copy of them on the wall over here, they referred to the fact that no funds available to certain organizations. I know that Mr. Bolin, who asked questions just a few moments ago, said the operable words are no funds. I want to ask you whether you think, and I would hold, that the operable words there are available to. And then you read on. The question is that if the Congress was true, if the Congress was clear, they would have prohibited money from the United States going to Central America, rather than money designated to individual agencies going to Central America. Is that correct?
I think it is legally correct, Mr. Corder, and I think that there are, in that same context, are ways that I, as a person not paid by the NSC, could condone doing, not being covered by the law. But I didn't, because neither you nor I should engage of this kind of interpretation for convenience, self-serving interpretations. I mean, it was clear to me, Mr. Bolin didn't want anybody in the U.S. government assisting the Contras. We lost. Okay, don't do it. Now, that's the right thing to do. But there were people after the vote here saying, well, the CIA can't do it and the Defense Department do it, who are the only people that are good at doing it, but all the rest of you can do it. Well, that's just not reasonable.
But the amendments were drafted in such a way that the prohibition was to, with respect to the CIA, the DOD, Department of Defense, and other agencies involved in intelligence activities, and was not a prohibition on the United States, per se.
That's correct.
I'm just reading an amendment on the Arms Export Control Act, and I think it'll clarify what I'm trying to say if I'm not doing it clearly. There, it does say as follows: the United States shall not enter into an agreement or spend money.
Yes, sir.
So it seems to me that if we can say the United States shall not do something with regard to one act, we can say the United States cannot do something with respect to another act.
Yes, sir.
The Congress, after Bolin 1 and 2, then went on again changing its policy in Central America. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
There was a time that we were saying we prohibited aid from going to agencies involved in intelligence, CIA and DOD, but at the same time, there was a very secret Intelligence Authorization Act that had an amendment saying there could be contacts and assistance to the Contras.
Yes, sir, there was.
Did that add clarity to your knowledge of the law?
No, sir, it just added to the murk. But we were pleased to get more murk. I mean...
I'd like to be more specific, if I may, directing your attention to the Tower Commission report, and regrettably, my copy doesn't have the page on it. Perhaps counsel can find out what page I'm referring to. Page C5 or C6 of the Tower Commission report. Now, that report says in December 1985, Congress passed two measures. The first, contained in Section 8050 of the fiscal year 1986 Defense Appropriations Act, reenacted the Bolin prohibition. The second, set out in Section 105A of fiscal year 1986 Intelligence Authorization Act, authorized classified amounts for communications, communication equipment, training, and advice for the Contras.
Is it C4 or C5? Good.
Page C6.
Yes, sir.
I'm reading on. The communications and advice provisions introduced substantial uncertainty as to whether any U.S. official, CIA, DOD, or NSC staff could advise the Contras on the delivery or distribution of lethal supplies. First, the provisions were so ambiguous that even the drafters debated their meaning. And then there's a footnote, which is footnote number 5, wherein one drafter on the House side has one interpretation of that which the Congress passed, and the other drafter on the Senate side had a different interpretation of that which the Congress passed.
Yes, sir.
I read on. A second, applicable statutory provisions were contained in an annex classified top secret and developed pursuant to a legislative history likewise classified. Whether such secrecy was warranted or not, it did not enhance common understanding of the statute. Do you agree with that statement in the Tower Commission report?
Yes, sir.
I read on. Within the executive branch, interpretations differed. The CIA, in a question for the record, 28th January Covert Action Update Briefing, concluded that it was not authorized to provide specialized logistics training needed by the Contras. The IOB, that's the Intelligence Oversight Board, by memorandum of April 8, 1986, provided Admiral Poindexter a classified legal analysis that concluded that under the communications and advice provision, any U.S. agency may lawfully provide basic military training to the Contras, so long as such training does not amount to the participation in the planning or execution of military or paramilitary operations in Nicaragua. Do you agree that amendments were passed in this institution in which the drafters themselves disagreed as to what they meant, and that created confusion such that even in the administration there was differing interpretations as to what could legally be done in Central America and not?
There's no question about it, Mr. Corder.
Mr. McFarland, directing your attention off of the statutes and on to Central America, why do you believe that it's important to assist the Contras in Central America?
Mr. Corder, I think that there are several reasons to do that. First of all, it is in keeping with our own history, the roots of our own revolutionary experience, to identify and be supportive of people devoted to pluralism, democracy, aspiring for nothing more than freedom. But that cannot be, as I think our country was encouraged to think in 1961, an open-ended matter that you do in an idealistic whim or in some place that the United States people don't believe is important, like Vietnam, you ought to be circumspect in identifying where such people that are aspiring to democracy are acknowledged by Americans and the U.S. Congress to be important to us. The past generation has taken us somewhat out of our idealistic phase and into a more realistic awareness that we cannot solve all the world's problems. But where our interests, our security, is affected by the future of a group of people aspiring for freedom, then yes, we ought to be able to get behind it. And certainly in our own backyard, where our failure could lead to greater Soviet presence or the presence of Soviet surrogates, to the sponsorship of other guerrilla movements which could infect Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico ultimately, it ought to be easy to explain that to the American people, and therefore it was probably as good a case as we could find anywhere in the world on which to respond to this Soviet stratagem. Now that's the second reason why sponsorship of the Contras made sense. We had just witnessed a 5-year period where the Soviet Union tried out a stratagem of sponsoring guerrilla movements that would topple moderate regimes and install their own totalitarian successor. And they had a phenomenal success. From 75 to 80, in Angola, Ethiopia, South Yemen, Cambodia, Afghanistan, Mozambique, Nicaragua, and so on. Now, if in this period in the 80s where Americans seemed conscious of that trend and were up to doing something about it and decided to pick Nicaragua, if you were sitting in the Kremlin watching this and you had evidence that the United States could not even cope with this phenomena where it was most important to them, not in Vietnam, right at home, then if you're a Kremlin leader, the precedent, and that's the issue, the precedent of failing where it ought to be easiest to win might well encourage the Soviet Union to continue this stratagem and to pour more money into it as opposed to other kinds of European orientation or Japanese or Chinese. And we might see this phenomena begin to recur again because they could see we cannot deal with it. And I think that likely. Within a couple of years, more money going into the Philippines, into Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, other places. So because, on the first point, it is morally the right thing to do, secondly, because it is precedentially terribly important to our ability to deter this stratagem of the Soviet Union in the future. But I have to say, Mr. Corder, that though I stand by those reasons and I believe that the Contras should be supported, that you also want to win. And you must be sure that the instruments of policy you choose in any given area are competent enough to do the job. Now that isn't clear. It isn't clear that instead of relying upon Contras, we ought not to have taken it to the American people and said, it is so important that we should quarantine Nicaragua and keep the Russians out of there. And that might have succeeded and it might have failed. But it would have been the application of an option for Americans to consider on its merits, not a resort to something that you couldn't even talk about that was unlikely to work. But I think when it comes down to the human angle of it, that unless the United States of America in the late 20th century develops a means to cope with this phenomena of Soviet subversion and carries it to our people and gets Americans to realize why it's important and to come together on a way of dealing with it, whether it involves the freedom fighters and us or just freedom fighters, but consciously enters it determined to win, our decline is certain.
You imply, I guess, by your statement that the Soviet Union is aiding and assisting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Is that not so?
Yes, sir. At a scale that is far orders of magnitude ahead of ours.
So there, the Soviets are trying or are spending more money in military equipment in Central America or in Nicaragua than certainly we are in aiding the Contras. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Another statistic that's kind of interesting, and it goes back 5 years, and that is that there are more Russian advisors in this hemisphere than there are American advisors.
How many Russian advisors are there in this hemisphere?
Well, it's on the order of 50 times as many. I was told that it was up on a scale of about 2,500 or 3,000.
In 1983, correct me if you know that I'm wrong or think I'm wrong on any of these. In 1983, the Soviets, East Europeans, and the Cubans, aid to Nicaragua was $120 million. In 84, $250 million. In 1985, $150 million. In 1986, $600 million. A total of almost $1.3 billion between 1979 and 1987. Is that close on the mark?
Yes, sir, it is.
In 1982, there were 10,000 Cuban advisors in Nicaragua. Was that close to the mark?
Yes, sir.
The Soviets have sent to Nicaragua Hind helicopters. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe what type of a weapon a Hind helicopter is, what it's capable of doing, and whether it's a fairly advanced type of military piece of equipment?
The Hind helicopter is an attack, assault, heavy helicopter that is perhaps the best armed helicopter weapon system in the world.
Better than ours?
Yes, sir.
Continue. What you're saying is that Nicaragua has better helicopters than the United States.
Yes, sir.
Continue.
The Hind is capable of carrying not only troops for assault and rapid mobility operations, but in its own arsenal carries light and heavy rockets as well as high-speed machine guns of mixed caliber, and can sustain a rate of fire both in defense of itself and support of assault operations on the ground, unparalleled in the world. It's a very, very imposing system.
It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that not only is the Soviet Union, not only is Cuba, but countries such as Czechoslovakia, North Korea, organizations such as the PLO, Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, are likewise helping the Sandinistas in Central America. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir.
In March of 1980, 8 months after the revolution, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about the revolution in Nicaragua, Managua, Nicaragua, already had formal diplomatic relations with Vietnam, Cuba, Kampuchea, Mongolia, North Korea, Libya, South Yemen, and the PLO, as well as every member of the Warsaw Pact. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it your understanding that Cuban pilots have flown Nicaraguan planes and helicopters?
I've seen the reports, yes, sir.
Is it your understanding that PLO pilots are flying from time to time Nicaraguan aircraft?
I've heard that, yes, sir.
It's my understanding that Somoza had about 14,000 soldiers. Do you know how many soldiers Nicaragua has today? About
more than 65,000 in uniform and more in the militias and reserve.
Does that make it the biggest military force in Central America?
Yes, sir, by a substantial amount.
Does that make it one of the biggest military forces in the Americas?
Yes, sir.
Exceeded by what countries, to your knowledge?
Cuba.
And perhaps the United States?
Yes, sir.
We hope. Mr. McFarland, in your testimony on Monday, you told Mr. Lyman that there were times that you thought that Oliver North might have withheld information from you, and that if he did so, you felt that he was doing it to protect you. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that, in hindsight, that it protected you Or do you think in hindsight that it exposed you to more risk?
Well, my presence here today would indicate that it probably didn't help. No, sir, I think it's well-meaning, but the wrong thing to do.